now and then share it on your pages.
Okay.
It's going to go live from the Zachary Winchester page. That's me. Hi.
Hello. I'm looking. Got it.
I shall share it as well. Get to talking about some stuff. Share it to the collective. You might want to share it to individuals as well. But what is the collective other than a bunch of individuals? What the?
Boom. Done and done.
Swimming with the swans, bathing with the bears. We are now swimming with the swans. Oh, hold on. I am close.
That's nice, actually.
Swimming with the swans?
Yeah, they're so peaceful.
Until
they want to like start biting your balls and stuff.
They're peaceful until they're not, and then they're terrible. And it's a problem.
Kind of like hungry people.
I am so sick of people using the excuse of I'm hangry as if it's as if any level of physiological discomfort excuses you.
Well, you were the one just saying they won't starve, they'll come for you.
It literally changes my physiology. Part of the reason why I always take food with me is I know I become an asshole and I know I have a hard time controlling it. So I always bring food.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I didn't know that you were able to hear that part.
Oh yeah, I heard that. And hangry is the micro version of that. The large scale version is full on communist revolutions because everybody's hungry. The micro version is hangry.
Economic disenfranchisement is large scale. I need a burger or I'm going to shout at you.
Yeah. Cultural revolutions are a meta level hangry.
Wow. I like to be spot on. All right. Okay. Are we ready to begin?
We are ready to begin.
We are ready to begin. Okay. So, welcome to the Dialectic podcast, and I am Zachary Winchester, and I am here with two others. What are their names?
I'm Eric Miller, PhD, and we're joined by Chris, who is often you have a podcast with him, but I'm not sure all of our listeners might be familiar. So, Chris, what is your story?
I have no cool letters next to my name. But I do teach shadow integration. So if you're into that sort of thing, give me a follow and we'll talk about it. And that largely informs why I'm taking the position that I'm taking today. And I'm very fucking excited to get into this conversation.
So for people who don't know what shadow integration is, how would you describe what you do?
Okay, so it's basically you can kind of conceptualize your shadow as the psychological landfill where you put all the parts of yourself you wish you didn't have. The only problem with that is the landfill is inside of your body. And so instead of actually out of sight, out of mind, you just got them rotting somewhere that you can't see. And so what shadow integration is going through all those things that you threw away that are rotting inside of you and hoping to reintegrate them into your life so that you don't have unintegrated parts of your psyche just kind of going rogue and doing terrible things without your awareness or permission.
Nice. So basically the things that you keep in the shadows, the things that you're not aware of are the things that kind of come out at the worst possible times.
Yes. And without your say, without your awareness, they're the mistakes that you are the only person that doesn't know you're making.
Good stuff. And so in a way, this is kind of a parallel to what we're talking about today. On kind of a larger scale, which is that balance between individualism and collectivism. And one of the nice things about shadow work is it kind of recognizes that we have different perspectives and different voices within ourselves who we normally think of as an individual. And in a larger scale, we're kind of going to be talking today about that balance in the world between whether we're looking out for ourselves as individuals or whether we are identifying with the groups around us. And I think this is a topic close to all of our hearts. Zach and I have talked a bit before how I actually was a libertarian for half of my life. And it wasn't really until Burning Man and actually going through training to be a therapist that I actually really found a more solid connection to community. I used to think that community meant conformity, so I basically stayed away. I'd rather be independent. I'd rather be in my own thoughts. I'd rather not care who I upset than to conform and make my life smaller for other people. And it wasn't until I found some spaces where I felt like the group supported the individual that I was open to trying something different. But I also feel like in the last 2 years, I'm kind of swinging the pendulum back the other way a bit. So I'm really excited for this discussion today. So what about you, Zach? What kind of brings you to this topic? Because you've been pretty excited about this.
Yeah, I've been words that end with ist. I am one who thinks that political identities, much like sexual identities or just anything based on a something that can change and change with new information or just new direction, but I'd prefer not to lock myself into being a that ist, because what if I become the opposite a little more tomorrow and want to fuck around and find out what it is to live differently, experiment with different things. But it could be said, if I'm forced to use that language, I guess I could say that I'm a recently reformed leftist, but not somebody who has been, as they say, red-pilled and is now indoctrinated to the other extremity or other side at all. I just am seeing more and more that well, the bird with the left wing and the right wing of the bird, sort of, that there's different moments. You know, it's like when I'm playing chess, I'm conservative when it's time to be, and fuck around and find out when that's called for, which is when there's an opening. And so, like, yeah, I'm going to launch right into universal basic income, but I think that my saying that I am super for universal basic income for the moment right now, most folks would perceive that falling super left of center on the political spectrum. But I think that there's moments for different moves. So, but I guess I'll probably be the one speaking more from the left.
Yeah, because I had this conversation. I had the beginning of this conversation with you yesterday, and I was like, "Are we going to have anybody on this call that like solidly represents the collectivist perspective?" And you said it was you.
Yeah, we could. I mean, I've got friends that would be super and would be great with that. But this is the trinity that we ended up with. So I'll try to lean this way during this.
Well, I guess a big part of what we try to do a lot is to look at the dynamic middle range. That it's the dialogue between conservative and liberal that's important more than either side winning. And in the same way, you're never going to have a perfectly individualistic or collectivistic culture. It's when is that appropriate to be, I believe, more individualist, and when is it appropriate to look out for your crew, look out for your people, and for them to get your back. And so maybe we should kind of define the topic a bit more. What does individualism or collectivism mean to each of you?
Well, I think it's just about like, so this, for me, this is really important because like when we have the conversation about individualism versus collectivism, for me, it's not like, I think we should be like firmly planted as in like, we are individualists and that it, and I don't give a fuck about anybody else. Yeah. Versus like, I'm a collectivist and individuals are stupid. Like, I don't think you're ever going to land on either side. But what I do think is important is to identify an existential starting point. Where is your baseline foundation? Do you identify fundamentally as an individual, or do you fundamentally identify as a part of a collective? Mm-hmm. And I think the proper existential starting point is as the individual. And what was the question exactly? I started like getting into all kinds of.
What's the definition for individualism and collectivism for each of us?
Yeah. So for me, it's about like, what do I identify as? If push came to shove, am I individual or am I part of a collective? And then for me, the fallback and the starting point is always the individual.
Yeah, existentially, I would agree with that. Almost, no, not even entirely. I would say I'm like halvesies right down the middle these days, because I used to value so much my own uniqueness, and I thought that I was supposed to be some sort of messianic hero. So if there was something good was going to happen in the world, it should be me who does it, and there's just a lot of ego going on there. And I find more and more that I really enjoy moments where I do feel like an appendage of an octopus that I like, but it's so different when you make it a political thing about governance, like, because now we're in this situation. Well, we've always been in this situation, but with, let's say hypothetically, there was a global pandemic and went to countries that where their national identity is super collectivist, and then it came to somewhere where its whole identity is the individual and is freedom. How's that gonna pan out for the various places? And so it's like, are we tied to each other's fate? So there's identity, and then there's how much, are we able to actually have our separate little bubbles in which I can entirely be an individual that is not affected by the psychological weather of the collective. I have been highly affected by the psychological weather of the effective. I think we all have recently around here.
So in a way, I think what you're saying is like Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, China, places that they have more of a collective sense of responsibility, were able to wear masks and lock down and shut down. Whereas kind of the reflexively rebellious America, Australia, well, Australia did an okay job. New Zealand, I think, closed down really well. That collective response actually led to a much better economic reality for them, better health reality. Less people died and less people are getting infected right now. And I guess this is where that idea of dynamic range comes in. Like, when is it important to identify with the people around you? And when is it important to really look out for getting that existential ground, that foundation in yourself first? And I think that changes over time. So if we kind of came to a definition on my end, individualism is doing just that, knowing what your reality is, knowing your values, knowing the validity and reality of your perspective, and having that as a starting point for your reality. I think collectivism is actually looking to the people around you for the starting point of your reality. And I think it works better in cultures that have been designed for thousands of years to do that. I think it's healthier to be collectivist, possibly in Japan or Taiwan, than it is to try to be a collectivist in the United States, because I think we've, in a way, fooled ourselves to think that we're not collectivist. But what is the more conservative response to the COVID than a collectivist that pretends like they're all individuals, but they're all just reflexively saying, you won't tell us what to do. We're not going to wear this mask. In fact, here are all the reasons why it will kill you if you wear a mask. And that was a collectivist response, but they were all pretending like they're individuals in a way. So I think it has to be this healthy ebb and flow, a healthy relationship with both sides.
Jeremy Hockett says, countries like Japan, Singapore, Germany, and Austria tend to veer tight, she says, and countries like New Zealand, Brazil, the Netherlands, and Greece tend to veer loose. And of course, all countries have tight and loose elements. It's an NPR thing about tight and loose societies. They're just so calling it those words instead, tight and loose. I mean, we're the conformity. I think that in America, I think that whichever team you ask, which side represents conformity to you, they're going to say the other. Like, I guarantee.
Oh yeah, 100%.
The liberal left will be like, conformity. Oh yeah, conservatives. And I think the other side is going to be like, oh yeah, those lefties, they all think the same thing. They all like mob, the mob reactions to things.
Protest, riots, revolutions, all those things.
So I think our political spectrum is just so.
Well, there's a difference between like political individualism and philosophical and existential
Very much. Can we
individualism.
separate that for this podcast, though? Because I think it is so different. I think it's like talking about governing individual, protecting or trying to take care of the collective, as opposed to position the individual to rise as high as they can and become the next Musk or Bezos. That's such a different conversational enterprise than to talk about, do you view yourself, do you feel yourself as an individual with friends and relations, or are you,
Well, I like the philosophical element of it because it explores the consequences of relating to yourself as either. Like if you relate to yourself as part of a collective, then there's parts of your individual expression that could get suffocated and never expressed, and that can lead to a lot of psychological dysfunction. Whereas on the other side, if you identify as purely an individual, but you don't integrate it in the collective, then it's like you've got a lot of different psychological dysfunctions there. And so like this idea of what the middle ground is and when each is applicable, I think is extremely important. But again, to go back to like the existential starting point from a philosophical point of view, I think is, in my opinion, the most important thing. Because if you have, in my opinion, because it's like human rights are an individualist issue. If we didn't have individualism, we wouldn't have individual rights. We wouldn't have the right to free speech. We wouldn't have the right to assembly. We wouldn't have the freedom of press. We wouldn't have the right to bear arms. We wouldn't have so many fundamental basic human rights if it weren't for individualism. And collectivism can kind of run over those because it's like we're starting to see censorship start to show up. And it's like, oh, well, you can't say that because it could be bad for the collective in this way, in which case the collective mindset starts to kind of eat away at the individual experience. And that's not something I generally think we can afford as a society.
And in fact, that's a bit of what allowed me to open up to being less of a libertarian, less of an individualist, is when I found the Burning Man community here in Detroit. It was a place that was open to so much diversity and supported so much diversity and so many different diverse views, sexualities, gender presentations, even before this was talked about. This was 17 years ago. This was not an explicit verbal conversation about these things the way it is now. And it was a shock to me that I saw, I'm hanging out with people from so many different backgrounds. And yeah, there's some problems and there's some gossip and stuff, but it was never too bad. And when people like acted out or they didn't get along with one another, they worked it out, and it went relatively smoothly unless someone really, really crossed the line. But part of what I think has been swinging me back towards the individualist side and back towards that libertarian side a bit more is that's been changing in the last 7 years. And like you've been talking about, Chris, all of a sudden, so many of my liberal friends who have been so open to different ideas are like, oh, you can't even talk about that. If you talk about that, you are clearly wrong. Or if you're thinking about it and you're not saying what I'm saying, you're also wrong. And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. This is not who this is not the contract we had. This is not the friendship I thought we had. And this is not okay. And this is actually a big part for this podcast is me trying to find a way not to be an enemy to my friends who have this view, but maybe talk about a different approach.
I have seen the consequences of a felt collectivism that you said, Chris, in not being able to become me fully, because in order to keep my place on the council, in order to like remain a member of the village, in order to like I think that a lot of us have gone through this recently. That there were things that okay, do I no longer allow myself to sincerely engage in any kind of discussion about this and that and just kind of like look at my feet if the conversation goes there in certain groups. And you feel how gross that feels, and how like cowardly, and how and also like I'm doing the people around me a disservice, because what are we supposed to do? What are friends for, other than to like, they're like the 5 people that you're around you become more like. I mean, I find that I want to have my like team of rivals just in my top 5, because like Like, because if I'm not expanding, then I'm cementing, and I don't want to cement into anything. So that's a big thing for me. Of that's where I lean heavily individual, and like have recently broken free from that. Is I'm accepting more that I might lose friends or even like lose a comfortable spot in a community by being honest. And if that's what the herd does, then I guess I'm just gonna have to consequences of that and maybe have less. But you don't end up having less friends. You have different friends. You know?
Well, I also think that's one of the best parts about individualism. That side of things is authenticity. Is that it's you understanding and knowing your own truth and perspective, but hopefully balancing that with a sense of empathy and compassion, but not losing yourself in that empathy or compassion. And so some of my best friends are absolute assholes. And if they're listening, they know who they are, because I call them that to their face. But I appreciate that, because these are the people who are going to tell me if I'm doing something that to them looks really stupid, and that is one of the most, or seems out of character or wrong or have a blind spot. And to me, that is one of the most valuable things to have in a friendship, is someone who's going to be, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, whether I want to hear that or not.
Yeah, and I like what you said about the Burning Man thing, because I've been going to Burning Man for 11 or 12 years or something like that, and I've noticed similar changes. It's a big part of the reason why I left San Francisco, is because the whole culture there changed in such a dramatic way that I couldn't stand to be around it anymore. Right. And that's exactly what terrifies me about collectivism. Is collectivism presupposes that everybody thinks exactly the same way. Mm-hmm. And that if you don't, you're essentially an enemy of the people. And depending on what's happening in the world, that could go either as like people don't talk to you as much, all the way to like people fucking kill you. Like there's a huge range of that. Mm-hmm. And so I feel inherently as a person who, because the thing about it is I was extremely mentally unwell until I embraced individualism. Mm-hmm. And then when I embraced my individual self, that's when my life started getting better. That's when I started finding a sense of purpose. That's when I was able to form a healthy relationship with myself, was when I put myself as an individual first. And then from there, I could start to care about everybody else, because I was pouring from an empty cup.
Well, that's
from a full cup.
Well, that's a big part of where the shadow comes from a lot of time, is those internalized judgments from the people around us growing up. And that is the collective. When we internalize those voices, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't think this, you shouldn't act that way, or you should be this way. And then we have to shut ourselves down. That's when we hide those split parts. That's when we shut them down and judge them in ourselves. And if they're natural, if they're part of us, they're going to come out somehow, and they're going to come out poorly. And we're going to be miserable in the process.
And so I personally really prefer the individualistic perspective, because I can take responsibility for my life and turn my life into whatever I want. And then as a result of that, if I choose to care for other people, then that's on me and I can make that choice. Mm-hmm. But in a collectivist society, I don't have a choice.
Well, I think that's a big part of having been a libertarian who found this culture. That I became a part of building a corner of the culture here in Detroit, is almost everything I've done has been about building communities that welcome in all sorts of people from all backgrounds within the community. And I have stood up to great detriment to myself, sometimes privately, sometimes publicly, for people who were making mistakes, who were learning, because those are exactly the sort of people who are going to benefit most from an open culture. But they're also the people who can cause the most problems in an open culture if somebody isn't there willing to greet them in a firm but loving way. And sometimes it was not worth the time and effort put into it. But I believe in doing it, because I believe it's possible to have communities that really support individualism, because a community of individuals is a lot stronger, more creative, more interesting, more unique than you're going to find from this lockstep reflection rebellion on the right now, or this lockstep, if you don't care in the way I care, you're fucking evil kind of view that we have at this moment, which I think is almost more insidious, because it seems like it's good.
Yeah. And healthy care for the collective any strong, integrated, healthy individual will have an authentic, natural regard and concern for the collective. But I don't think it goes the other way around.
It doesn't have to, that's for sure. But I don't know. I think a lot of people I think there's a healthy individualism and an unhealthy individualism. I think there's a healthy collectivism and an unhealthy collectivism, because there are people who are just greedy, narcissistic, sociopathic sons of bitches, or just bitches, who are really out for themselves, and they don't care about the harm they cause. In fact, they might even revel in it. And that's, I think, a form of individualism that is dangerous. And I think reflexive rebellion is a false individualism that's extremely dangerous.
So is having a law that says you can't victimize others in this way a collectivist move or an individualist, or are we? Or
Depends on the way you're going about doing it.
If you do this, this happens to you.
It depends on what this is.
Okay.
If you think this, then like, yeah, that's a dangerously collectivist perspective.
Yeah, no, I'm saying.
But if it's like if you kill a person, then it's like, yeah, that's any society would do that.
Yeah, well, that's why I'm that seeing it as we're individualists or collectivists, I think doesn't work for me, because it's like different situations will call for different, and at the end of the day, it is about recognizing that a good collective is made up of a lot of hopefully healthy. And
but as a governing structure, you need organized hierarchy of principles and values, and one has to be first. So it's either individualist or collectivist. Like, you have to have a first place where if shit hits the fan, you pick one or the other.
If shit hits the fan, things get.
And so I go individualist.
But also, like with the pandemic, it's like when shit really hits the fan. I mean, if this thing, if COVID was like had a say 80% fatality rate, we'd have to get real fucking collectivists, right? I would have no problem with like, all right, like hard the fuck lockdown. We have to do what we have to do to make less people die. And the cavalier cowboy reaction around here. This is terrible. Maybe seen as terrible of me, but I think it's honestly the language in a lot of our heads. You know, that the level of deadliness of this virus made it so at some point I'm looking around at the reactions and how much it's being politicized, and I'm like, yep, this is what happens when this comes to America. Good fucking luck telling people that they have to be safe. Good fucking luck, because that's not a popular move around here. Like we're in Michigan, and our governor is quite hated by the conservative element here.
Well, I think this is where reflexive rebellion is different than actual individualism. So reflexive rebellion is, if anybody tells me anything, then I am going to do the opposite. So if someone tells me the artist you're listening to is popular now and I'm fucking punk rock, well, fuck that, I don't like it anymore, right? That reflexive rebellion is the flip side of conformity, because whatever you're doing isn't about your values and your principle and your ground in the physical world. It's still about what that other person's doing, saying, or thinking. It is the opposite of individualism. True individualism is knowing yourself and your principles and trusting your five senses to a reasonable degree, and then acting on those things. So I think a lot of what both sides is calling same thing with collectivism. On the left, collectivism is not, we are all going to agree and care in the same exact way, and we're going to destroy anybody who doesn't, because that's still us versus them. There's no collective there. It's a mob. It's a clique. And those are both, I think, unhealthy.
You're talking about like a global collective then, because I feel like any collective that you get into is going to fall into those tribal problems.
I think that
talking about a global collective.
No, I think that there's what I'm trying to say is I think there's four quadrants. I think you have healthy individualism and healthy collectivism, and that moving back and forth within that range is ideal, rather than being caught in either one or the other inflexibly, or being caught in the negative individualism or the unhealthy individualism or the unhealthy collectivism. So for me, when the shit hits the fan, I want to have a bug out bag. I've got a generator. I just bought a lot of ammo. And if I need to take care of myself, I will. But I've also reached out to a bunch of my friends who I know are also responsible, because I don't want to go up against a mob of 50 people as an individual in the post-apocalyptic world. I want to have my own crew at my back. And I want to have people who are going to support me, and I'm going to support them. So I'm ready to take care of myself, but I'm also looking for other self-sufficient people who want to be together at a time like that.
Which is the key element of that, is self-sufficient people.
Yes. Yes.
It's like, I don't want anybody in my collective who is not a strong individual.
I said I was gonna be the collectivist, but I agree with that intensely.
Well, the question, well, I see it as different flavors of people. So there's different sorts of strength. There's different sorts of intelligence. So I mean, it's like D&D, right? Your bard or your cleric might not be punching the troll in the face, but you're glad they're there after the fight, right?
Because they have individual skills and talents that they can contribute.
Exactly. So if we're looking at strength in terms of these people are self-sufficient, you share values, they have skills, and everybody's willing to get each other's back. To me, that's a healthy collective.
Agreed. And I would think that those people in those collective probably started from the individual. Because you just can't get there starting at the collective. Like there's no route to that kind of robust character starting at the collective.
What if someone is raised by a caring family that's self-aware and they've all been looking out for each other, they've had a healthy childhood and family life?
You would still have to primarily cultivate yourself as an individual, I would think. Otherwise, what are you contributing to?
It's really hard to cultivate yourself as an individual when your basic needs aren't met. And that's so that's one of the ways in which I see some collectivist moves would help some individuals even come to start to take shape.
Yeah, we need a lot more of it. That's for damn certain.
So I guess what I'm saying is this really is about the dynamic adaptive range between the two extremes. That ideally we want to cultivate these healthy elements of collectivism, and we only do that through relationships. I was super individualistic when I was younger, and I wasn't as good with being friends with a wide variety of people because I was so self-focused. But the more that I have kind of broadened my horizons, and the more that I've opened up, the more people I can connect with, the more experiences I have, and the richer my individual personal life and inner world is. So I needed a healthy collective around me in order to maximize myself as an individual. And I'm a lot happier now that there's a balance between my more abstract, libertarian, goal-oriented, achievement-oriented, self-defining life. Like I think I was sharper and I was faster back then in some ways, but I definitely wasn't happier. And finding the balance between the two, I think there's a richness to it that's really nice. But that's not necessarily been the case for about a year and a half now, about 2 years. A lot of what I thought was the safe collective around me was shaken. Another problem with a collective is cancellation and gossip and rumors. And a lot of what I thought was, I almost said safe space, and I hate that term. What I thought was a caring, mutually supportive environment, all of a sudden didn't feel that way. And it shook me. And I had a good 7 years of general happiness and contentment that was really shaken by that. And it's only really in the last 3 to 4 months that I've kind of come back to a new level of comfort, both in myself and in the relationships around me. And I think that leveling up has been really good. So it's a reconnection on a more personal level with a group of people where I'm forming deeper relationships, but it's relationships where we're ready to look out for each other if things go wrong. And I think those friendships, those communities are less susceptible to some of this other stuff that we've been talking about in terms of cancel culture and groupthink, as long as people are active and alive in those conversations, if that makes sense.
Well, see, that's interesting because I'm having somewhat of a similar but very different experience where my outspoken individualism is helping me find a group of people that are more like me.
Yes.
And so me being like, this is all wrong. This is all wrong. Here's what I think and here's what I want, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
that gets all the people that are afraid of the collective
Mm-hmm.
to perk up and be like, oh, hey, I don't have to do this. Like, I can go hang out with this guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've been getting friends like that. I've been finding out that people that I thought wouldn't hang out with me anymore actually secretly agreed with me.
Mm.
And so it's like, it's interesting that me going further into my individualism is kind of having a similar experience. But then that does kind of beg the question of like, well, how tight are those bonds? If everybody's all in it for themselves, and it's like, how far is that loyalty?
Mm-hmm.
But I can say the most loyal friend I've ever had, I think, is a staunch individualist. And my friends that have been more likely to betray me and have been kind of weak-minded have been more collectivist.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that that's a solid thing, but that's definitely been my experience. I tend to get more betrayed and hurt by collectivists than I do by individualists.
I've often said that if you're acting on your values and your principles, rejection is a gift.
Mm-hmm.
Because the more that you actually speak your truth and your expression in the world, the people who agree with you and connect with that, they're going to be drawn to that. And the people who have other ways of living are going to mock it, ignore it, attack it.
Mm-hmm.
But at least you know who that is. I don't know if everybody has the constitution to live that way all the time, because it can be pretty stressful.
Hard.
if you're always kind of going against the grain. And I think that's also why it's useful to eventually find communities that share enough of your values where it's not constant friction and conflict, where you get that, yeah, everybody's kind of speaking out loud, but you share enough values so it's not constant conflict and divisiveness.
Well, it's good to not have the need. It's good to know that you could leave, whether it's a relationship or a friendship or something that people end up having a lot of the roots of their identity get all tangled up in, like Burning Man.
Mm-hmm.
I've been noticing. I'll just be like scrolling through the social network, the one with the pictures, the Instagrams, and I'll just come across someone who is kind of like part of my what now emotionally registers as like my old life, and I'm noticing that what was once like I was certain was like a part of my identity and has all of these really great friendships and experiences attached to it, which is like festival culture. Like, I think I'm going forward on the Burning Man thing, but I don't know if I have desire or I don't know if like festival world, or
Yeah,
like
I've been oddly losing all those friends myself recently.
and it's funny, the movie SLC Punk very, very brilliantly illustrates the thing of like you conform so much to nonconformity that one day putting on the suit and doing the thing that you used to think was selling out is the punk rock move, and I'm seeing that more and more with things that I used to think made me unique or like aware of something, awakened. We have the word woke now. Like when I hear someone use the word consciousness, or like when I think of the conscious community, I'm like, I don't expect. If I know I'm going to something that is a conscious event now, I expect there to be a lot of conformity and a lot of like eye rolly, like ranked and filed groupthink going on. Generally around positivity, or like what positivity is, and I just
It's obnoxious.
thank you.
It is
your blunt.
It's very obnoxious. And actually, what a lot of burners who visited Detroit have always appreciated about it is the dark element that we bring. And when a bunch of us would go to Chicago, Christopher Breedlove we'd be at this thing where everybody is like, they're rolling and they're just wearing bright colors. And then like people are coming with clown masks and flame throwing top hats and just kind of just like coming in with that darker element. And Breedlove would be just, I fucking love you guys. Like, thank you. And just it shakes things up a little bit because it steps out of that usual light and good leathers and feathers sort of West Coast vibe that permeates so many of these festivals. So
I'd like to read Jeremy's thing here. Also, I'd like to say that, I was saying earlier that our fourth, who would have been actually more collectivist, or just that is my friend Steve Elliott.
But this is a loose use of the term definitely. We don't know that. That's not been measured.
He says socialized medicine definitely helps people.
But if you've traveled to Europe,
this is also the next.
Well, hold on. I want to talk on this for a moment, because I think this is a good point. I've been waiting to get to Steve's point here. If you go to Europe and you talk to people who get like 9 month sabbaticals, or 9 months, that'd be great. 9 week sabbaticals. People who can travel around the world, who can set time aside to do artwork, that they have their health taken care of. A lot of these people do have a lot of creative expression, but the problem is a lot of them don't have access to the money to make these things big. So if you are connected to people in the Bay Area 10 years ago, and you start getting in the festival community out there, the Burning Man community out there, you can take your artistic talent and blow it up worldwide, where you can do that in Europe. You have more freedom to do it. There's more people doing artwork, but without that capitalist money behind it, you don't always have the same bang for your buck if you're really driven. But on the flip side, one of the things that really opened me up to understanding collectivism more was because I grew up reading Buddhism, practicing Zen and Theravada Buddhism since I was 16. And my libertarian, I read some Ayn Rand early on, couldn't wrap my head around was how much of what is Buddhism and Hinduism is their collectivist culture, and how much of that is useful systematic teachings that make a difference universally. And then I came across one of the only psychotherapies to come out of Eastern culture, because Taoism, Confucianism, Buddhism is so ingrained. It's like that is their therapy, is Nikon therapy. And it's actually a specific therapy that comes from Pure Land Buddhism, which is less experiential, more about worship. And it has 3 questions. And these are 3 questions that if you answer them quickly, they sound like, well, of course, their questions are useful, whatever. But if you practice them every day for 3 months, it dramatically changed my worldview on a level I never expected. And I've done it with my students at my college course. And it's one of the things that even with 2 weeks of practice radically gives them a sense of collectivism in a way that I think people in the West have a hard time wrapping their head around. And these 3 questions are, you can apply it to any group, to any day, to any week in your life. And the first one is, what have I received from X? What have I received from X? And I'll post the link in the comments. What have I given to X? And finally, the last one is, what troubles and difficulties have I caused? And when you talk about what have I received, it doesn't matter whether you've paid money for it or not. So just because you pay money for your electric bill, or your cell phone bill, or taxes for the roads that you drive on, or the person who takes your ticket as you go into the parking lot, it's the very fact that these things exist and support you that this exercise is designed to help you notice. And what it often does is it takes people who feels like it's me versus everybody to go and like, there's 1,000 people right now making sure that I have electricity coming into my house. And that I have heat here, and that we're able to connect over the internet, and that I have roads to drive on. And it's this flip from us versus everything to there's literally an entire interwoven infrastructure of millions of people helping to make my life the way it is right now possible. And that's not something to believe. It's something that's worth trying out through this approach. So I'm going to go ahead and throw that in the comments if people are curious.
So you could do that with like X being the American project.
That's really abstract. I think it works best when you put it in your own life.
But wait. So, but what has this done for me? What's a good example then? Like,
so what has my family done for me? What has my family given to me? What have I received today generally in my life? What have I received? What you could do to where you work. You could do it to your community or your friendships. You could do it to your significant other. So basically anybody that you interact with or any period of time. So just do it for a 24-hour period. What have I received today? What have I given today? What troubles have I caused today? So the troubles are, if I went to pump gas and there's currently a war in the Middle East, then because I'm using gas, there's a bit of an interconnection there. And it helps you understand both the interconnected web that supports you in a very realistic and practical way, and the impact that you have on the people around you.
It's so, because I translate that in my head, and it's so funny that like I'm realizing how into this whole individualist thing I am, because I hear that and I just go like, God, that's so amazing that all these people are acting in their own best interest, and look at what is created.
Yes.
When everybody acts in their own best interest, we get this.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Mm-hmm. It is.
And like the collective element of it is important too, but my head goes back to like, if they didn't have something in it for them, they wouldn't do that. They're not doing it for kindness. They're doing it for their own individual needs.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like, yeah, thank God. Like we're all acting in alignment with what we actually need.
Right. And that is extremely helpful. And for my clients who feel like they have no one in their corner, that they have no support, or just the opposite, my clients who are so individualistic that they're narcissistic and they believe that they're truly a self-made person, that when you realize that your factory, it exists because there's roads going to it, and it exists because there's electricity going to it, and there's an infrastructure, and there's a country that supports, that keeps this safe so we don't fall into anarchy. And this is where, when I run into anarchists, I'm like, okay, name to me one area in the world that's remained anarchist for more than 1 year successfully. And you can't name it, because either they've fallen into chaos and it's the sociopaths with the biggest muscles who win, or the neighboring country invades it because it's chaos and it's dangerous and those people have resources. So this interconnectedness and the individuals who make it up, they're both important. And to me, it's really the dynamic range again with both. So Zach, I'm curious, where can I post this where it'll come up in our feed? I'm missing that.
I don't think we have that.
Post it down here in this comments right here.
And where is here? You can see that in your end.
Oh,
Right there, bro. It's
okay,
right
you got it.
yeah. Well, I guess you can message it to me in the.
I will message it to you.
Message it to Jackery, not Zach. Yeah, that's the one you have to message it to him, because I've made it so I'm incapable of using Facebook, except when I'm at my mom's house, and I've made it difficult and confusing for myself. So that I'll do it less.
So I just want to, because I've heard this conversation before about like, there's no such thing as like a self-made person. And I get that from a certain perspective, but also there definitely is.
Yeah, but you got to address the unfairness at some point, Chris. Like, that's like, I don't get so wrapped up in that. I think I sometimes see you doing this where you're putting back so much. Huh?
What unfairness?
The unfairness of people being plopped into a side of town where they are completely like, you know, like Flint.
But what do you think I'm saying that's unfair about? What do you think I'm saying about that?
The self-made person thing? Well, okay.
Yeah,
so
I don't see how those two connect.
That could be perceived as not recognizing that you were born with this much momentum and the cards in your favor.
But that doesn't mean self-made people don't exist, because there's people that are self-made that were born in way worse situations than I am. Like Viktor Frankl, for instance.
I forgot who he is.
He survived the fucking Holocaust and created logotherapy. There's plenty of self-made people that have way worse lives than me. In fact, that's the more common thing, is you're more likely to be self-made if you started from shit.
I'm supposed to be coming from the collectivisty
No.
side, so I'm trying to do that at least once every so often. And I am hearing, so like Jeremy's comment here is like, I mean, we have these conversations where we can say a bunch of philosophy words and about like, you know, existentially identifying as the individual, but like that's how I feel like it's almost two separate conversations of once it goes political and it's talking about the role of government, because like when there's. I mean, okay, so I'm just gonna read the comment. Do any of you have a plan on having children? I find it interesting to even have this conversation requires having the luxury to feel that we have transcended the basic necessities of mutual reliance just to imagine embracing an ideology of individualism is itself a product of having lost the implicit collectivist nature of humanity for the vast majority of its existence. I mean,
I completely disagree because I'm relying on you to be a solid individual. That's what I'm relying on you for.
What do you mean by relying?
If things
In
remain
that sense,
well, he's talking. This comment is talking about our mutual reliance, and it's like for me as an individualist, it's like that's exactly what I'm relying on is you being a strong individual. Because if you're not a strong individual, then our collective structures don't work. And so in a collective, the thing I'm relying on is you being a strong individual.
So I almost assume that at any given time, if I'm in a bunch of people, that a good percentage won't be reliable.
Mm-hmm.
And then the responsibility.
You shouldn't rely on them.
No,
you rely on the strong ones.
A country of 350 million plus is not 330 million. Anyway, like a country this big, or even just being in a city. I was in a city recently. I wouldn't even call it a city, but it was population 900, no police force of its own. You know, like if somebody were to call the police, they would be calling state police to probably drive an hour. And it's like, well, how does that work? It's like, well, everybody here is super well armed, and there's only 900 of us. So yeah, an entire year, no crime, you know, like with literally zero crime. And it's like, well, that's because there's fucking 900 people and not thousands.
Mm-hmm.
When there's thousands, I mean, this conversation just becomes so different because it's like, and when we're talking about a country of fucking 330 plus million, it's so different than if you're talking about there's 12 of us, or like, you know, I found my tribe and I've got my community and I like this group of friends, but at heart, when I retire to my loft, I am an individual. It's a very different conversation than what are we going to do with having, what are we going to do with the resources? What are we going to do with, you know, to achieve some semblance of fairness? Not
so.
Like,
Yeah, no, I get it. So I think a big part of what we've been discussing here, this podcast is paradialectic. So especially for new listeners, I kind of want to bring it back in about why we call it that. And so we're talking about the paradoxes and then dialectics. So dialectics are two opposing views that often exist within us. Sometimes they exist within a culture that appear like mutually incompatible, but they actually exist together. And a conversation, a phrase that we've been using a lot is this concept of the adaptive dynamic range. And it took me a long time to kind of come up with this idea, because I literally did think I was a self-made person because I had two businesses by the time I was in my 20s, and I was thinking differently than the people around me, and I was a libertarian. So from that perspective, from the perspective that I had, I was a self-made person. But the kind of more I went on in life, the more I realized that I had the ability to work my way through an existential crisis I had at 13 that caused me to think uniquely, and that gave me the time to be that emo punk kid. We didn't have emo back then; it was industrial and goth. In the back of the class, all dressed in black, because I was in a relatively stable environment and a relatively stable family, and I was able to start the business because my white suburban neighbors would let these couple white kids with the leprechaun window cleaning name into their homes. And in fact, when I had our friend Linnell or Shunya join us, that we had to work extra hard to make those same housewives feel comfortable with us there. And so over time, I realized that, yeah, in many ways, I'm a self-made individual, and I'm also benefiting from the community that my ancestors and people who look like me built. And I also, here's the thing, I don't think there's shame in that. I don't think it's bad to think that I have privilege. I think it's something that I need to be aware of and to be able to share that with whoever I value, not just people who look like me or have my background. But in terms of whether it's individual or collective, I really do believe it's both, and that finding a balance of both in a positive way is more ideal than choosing one or the other.
So when people hear self-made man, do they think I never got help from anybody ever on my entire path and I did everything alone?
I kind of did when I was younger. If you asked me when I was 21 and you kind of like, I'd be like, well, I guess because my parents were pretty independent and like we didn't have a big family. I don't think I think I kind of took for granted how much they provided for me. And yeah, I think when I was in my 20s, I would have answered, yeah.
I'd say to me, it looks like coming from a difficult starting point and not receiving a small loan of $1 million, you know, like that's not self-made. That's like I mostly admire Elon Musk and or just like his net effect on the world. And I wouldn't call him self-made. You come from.
But I also think he is. Like Elon Musk is one of the most unique individuals I've ever come across, and he's expressing himself in the world in very bold ways that cut against the grain.
That's not my what I was saying about is okay. So the word privilege is beaten to fucking death and then shot more times than Hitler in the fucking Inglourious Bastards movie. But so instead I'll say like luxury. But like you know, a starting point of luxury is, I guess it just comes down to because the way you hear it a lot is that you're shaming somebody for not doing enough in the world because they started with such a good hand that you should be able to get to the point where you are doing generosity and sharing. And me and Chris have talked about this a lot. Like shaming somebody into an ethical move never works. I don't think anybody has ever been shamed into doing something sincerely kind in this world. But what I did think that it definitely, like, if you're gloating about how self-made you were and you started with this many chips and other were fucking in the negative, and it was just very difficult to rise. Like some of the
what about like Jay-Z?
I would say that's pretty fucking self-made. That's
and so that's why I'm curious why you're bringing privilege into it, because being self-made and coming from privilege, to me, they have nothing to do with each other.
I guess it depends on what you're saying. Are you talking about I built my character out of the building blocks, like Andy says?
For me, it's I built my character, I designed my life, I figured out what I wanted to do, I created it myself.
I mean, out of a menu, though. She says, I don't see how there is a truly self-made person. Everyone uses someone to get where they are. Networking and utilization of others' knowledge and resources make truly 100% self-made impossible. I don't know if that would.
So I kind of look at it this way. I feel that I'm self-made on one hand, in the sense that I feel like I live a pretty unique life and I've sought out very unique experiences. But all of those experiences I've sought out, it kind of comes back to that term, standing on the shoulders of giants. Like part of who contributed to my systems thinking is Einstein and Bruce Lee and Stephen Hayes, who created an acceptance and commitment therapy. These are all thinkers whose way of thought support how I think now.
But they didn't make you.
They didn't make
you. They gave you the tools to make yourself.
Exactly. Yes. And that's what I'm saying. It's a mix of both. It's that dynamic range, that balance between honoring the collective, the people around me who have produce these, and then I also curate and look for that knowledge and those experiences so that I make myself as part of a collective, and then I also then pass that on in the classes and groups and communities that I'm a part of. And to me, that you can't separate these two, that they go with one another, and that it's useful to be able to shift back and forth where there's times where I'm more self-focused and I need to look out for myself more than other people. And then there's other times where I'm spending much more time on the community around me. And it tends to ebb and flow like in a 3-year cycle for me. I get burnt out in the community. I kind of come back to myself. I spend more time there. And then I forget how hard it is to create things in the community. I go back to that again. And it's, to me, it's that ebb and flow, not the one or the other.
And I think I'm something that, like, the reason I'm sticking on the self-made person thing so much is because it was a really inspiring archetype for me when I wasn't doing very well. And so if this idea that there's no such thing as a self-made person were to become popular and were to become common thought, I think of me when I wasn't doing very well and I looked at all these self-made people and I was really inspired and I was like, that's how I'm going to get myself out of this. If we just collectively agree there's no such thing as a self-made person anymore, then that inspiration and that fight and that drive to take a piece of shit life and turn it into something all on your own, like that's important.
Hmm.
And I guess what I'm saying is yes and, not either or.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And as supposed to, and I'm not doing this as much as but I feel it now. I feel like I could start arguing for fucking compassion now with you two privileged fucks. Just kidding. It is with self-made. It's like it's back to there's such a separation between economic and existential. Like we're talking about the difference between like building a character or building a fucking becoming affluent. That's two very different takes on self-made. I mean, I know people who ain't the fuck affluent, but I'd call them a self-made character. Like just really awesome that they've been able to carve out this like person that I see as heroic from a lump of clay that sometimes just renders people not very defined.
Well, I think a great example of that is Naval Ravikant. And for those who want to, I really recommend you check out the Tim Ferriss podcast. I believe this was maybe about 5 weeks ago. And Naval Ravikant is somebody I've followed on Twitter for a while. He is born the same year I was, so he's 46 years old. He was born in India. His single mom moved him to, I think, New Jersey or Brooklyn or someplace like that when he was a young kid. He ended up working enough. He got a scholarship in order to get, I think, to Dartmouth or some other major college like that. He then started to work. He got his way into working with computer programming. He found himself out to the West Coast, and he started a business. And the venture capital, the founders who were funding him, screwed them over like they do so many people. And then he went on to sue those venture capitalists for stealing all of these millions from him. And then he was canceled by capitalists because you don't bite the hand that feeds you on the West Coast. You don't sue venture capitalists. And he went on to make all of these hundreds of millions of dollars. And part of the reason why I want to listen to this podcast is so many of the things that we talk about here, he has distilled down to these tweets that just like cut to the heart of many of the things that we're talking about. And what was great when I heard him was I've been doing mindfulness, like I said, mindfulness meditation since I was 16, but I was always this conflict in me because that individualist in me had a hard time with this concept of no self, had a hard time with this concept of we are pure awareness, and your identity, your ego should just be dissolved. And I spent a bit of time with Western mysticism, which talks about the perfection of the ego. And I always wanted to find a better way to find a balance between those two. And then something really struck me, and I'll wrap this up quickly. When I heard Naval speak about his method of meditation, and it wasn't the method that he described, it's the result of the method that really caught my attention. And he described how he came out of these sessions like he doesn't want to give them up anymore. Like he comes out having a conversation with his best fucking friend. He enjoys it. It's hilarious. It's fun. And I when I work with my clients, I often ask, what would I need to think, believe, or see in myself to think the way they do? So when someone comes to me with a form of depression I haven't seen before, and they start to describe their life, I'm like, what would I have to do inside myself to feel the way that person does? And then I test it out. So I did that with Naval, and I came back to my meditation practice, and I made a small shift. Instead of being an observer to my inner world, or using something like cognitive behavioral therapy where I'm like, well, that's a false belief, I'm going to change it. I just started to have a light conversation, assuming that every part of me had my best interests in mind. That my fears, my anger, my frustration, my jealousy, my ambition, my hope, my silliness, and let them talk with each other. And it was a small shift to what I've been doing for decades, but the results of it have been astounding. And he's both a great example of a self-made person who kind of found a way to find a collective in himself within an individual. And I think that's really interesting. For me, I want to bring this up too, because I knew you were going to be on with his shadow work.
Yeah, that's exactly my experience. And that's exactly the work that I teach of all the different parts of you. And that is also my model of collectivism. That's actually really perfect, is because this is where I kind of got the idea. There's also this Hermetic principle, like the Hermetic principle of correspondence.
Yeah.
It's the as above, so below, so within, so without principle.
Yes.
It says
Yes.
that the inside world is the exact same as the outside world. I've noticed this to be true. I've observed this to be true. And so for me, the thing that I noticed was like, okay, when each of these individual parts know who they are, what they're all about, and what their highest intention is, and they're allowed to fulfill that without anything getting in the way as a part of a collective, then it's like, great, everything works well. So for me, that was the model.
Yeah. And then that's, for me, it was the collective end. Like for various parts of myself, they were great as individuals, and I would elevate them within myself. But the second I made the shift to every one of these parts of me has the ability to be this full individual, but we're also all got each other's back. That collective element within myself changed my experience of meditation. And it's been a really good month working with that. Because again, I've worked with similar stuff, but this subtle difference. So with you, how did you come across that technique, Chris? How did you find that approach in your work?
Well, that's the interesting thing about it is I've had a very long history of really severe mental illness. I never got diagnosed because I was one of those like punk rock guys where I was like, no one's going to tell me what's wrong with me. Like whatever it is, I'll figure it out. Like, fuck you guys. Like, even though I almost died a bunch of times and I had a couple psychotic breaks and I was really suicidal and I was just really stubborn. But then I got introduced to this. I was living with 3 witches at the time, one of which Zach knows. And so she turns to me and she goes, you're not broken. You're just taking really poor care of yourself. And she introduced me to this book that it was called Voice Dialogue, and basically introduced me to parts work. Nice. And shadow integration and all that sort of stuff. And so that's when I started noticing that. And then I started noticing that the dramas that were happening inside of me were perfectly mirroring the dramas that were happening outside of me. And so I was like, wait a minute. So if I just get this all figured out on a collective level, everything around me sorts itself out. So that's really fucking cool. And then there's parts of me that resonated and wanted to deal with the collective. And there were other parts of me that wanted to deal with just me. There was a place for everything. So all I had to do was get right with myself. And then the parts of me that cared about the collective would do their thing with the collective. The parts of me that cared about me would take care of me. And they would do it all in service of the greater whole, which if I could do that in myself, I could do that in the world around me as well. And so that's why I stress the existential starting point, because I love this dynamic range that you're talking about. And I do think it's absolutely essential, but I think the starting point is the main point that I really kind of wanted to drive home when it comes to this, is that, like, yes, the dynamic range where if you have one without the other, you have either narcissism or codependency. But if you don't start at the individual, then you will definitely have codependency.
Well, here's the interesting thing. I actually started with the individual. I mean, it sounds like in your life that you kind of maybe started like you were thinking about the people around you or that sort of thing, where for me, I got kicked out of Sunday school when I was 6 years old for asking like the 12-year-old questions. Like, I was raised with a scientific mindset. My dad was scientifically minded. I watched Nova and Natural Kingdom at 5, and I hated humanity at 5. Like, if I could push a button at 7 to wipe out the human race and leave all the animals alone, I probably would have done it, not out of maliciousness, but just because like I thought people sucked. And it wasn't until I hit puberty and realized that I kind of want to connect to other people, but I have no idea how, that I started to like switch to try to figure out myself. And I literally woke up to this idea that I can't just be a product of my environment and heredity. I wanted to have a soul. Like I thought my opinions and ideas were really important. And so I spent my entire life on that. And it wasn't only much later in my life that I found the collective and I found this sense of empathy. So I think for me, it was kind of coming back to finding the collective in myself that really helped my self-work. So I think it's interesting that there seems to be kind of a mirror image here. Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is important. Go ahead, Zach.
I want to this doesn't, it veers in a bit of a direction. We have 20 minutes left, and I need to say this because this is like I observe this more intensely from this conversation, where it feels like it would have. My brain feels confused by the option to veer into politics, governance. I feel like I would have personally, I would benefit more from like we're talking about the self. We're talking about how you view yourself, because they're so different arenas. And what I keep noticing more and more with this, the way the political spectrum is seen and with the way it's identified with in America right now, particularly liberal conservative, is I know so many people who identify and will attest so strongly to their leftism or their liberalism. I know that there is a strong distinction to be made in the memosphere, particularly right now. But like I know people who are liberal and leftist to the bone, but in terms of what they want to see govern and what their political leanings are. But as individuals and in the way they make choices on the individual level and emotionally, socially, they're conservative as fuck. They're some of the most boundaried people, some of the most I must defend what is me and what is mine, attitudes and just emotional profiles. They're fucking super conservative about their dogma and stuff. And we do not wiggle from that. Super, what's the word? Parochial about things. And this is it. We found our model. We're gonna live this way. And just super duper big about this goes into a whole other thing. But we can keep adding letters to LGBTQA because I think we should keep, if we're truly liberal and we're truly freeing people, then erotic plasticity should be endless. We could add 74,000 letters to that, because who the fuck defines? So I know people they're super into definition, they're super into lists, and they're super into defending the sanctity of their parochial worldview, and that all strikes me as super fucking conservative.
And the same thing's true on the right. A lot of people vote for Trump because to them, he was the punk rock candidate. He was the non-politician. He was the nonconformist. And so I think that, again, what we're kind of talking about here in terms of this understanding the kind of multitudes in us, the reason why people are hypocrites is not because they're trying to be duplicitous. It's because the parts of themselves are not talking to themselves. There's no inner relationship there. And so this is what paradialectics is. It's understanding how we are complex. There's a quote, "Do I contradict myself? Fine, I contradict myself. I contain multitudes." I can't remember who said it, but if you Google it, I'm sure you'll find out. And this came from Robert Anton Wilson. I came across this 40 years ago, and it always struck me. And it's something that's really, really fascinating me. And I see it all the time with my clients. We have conflicts in ourself that when we are not admitting and we're not talking within ourselves about these things that we contradict ourselves on, this is where we have poor relationships with ourselves and everybody around us. And I think that the reason why we're doing this podcast is to talk about this. How do we point out that, hey, maybe you're not a bad person because you're a hypocrite. Maybe you just have to slow down and talk to yourself about these two opposing views and integrate those two opposing views.
Yeah, and that's really all it ever takes. And that's why I teach shadow integration. Actually, it's just kind of a form of, well, it did save my life, so that was kind of the main motivation. But ultimately, it's also political activism for me. Is because it's really interesting. This whole left and right split thing kind of corresponds to the brain hemispheres and different levels of morality and masculine and feminine concerns. It's you've got all the masculine concerns on the right, and you've got all the feminine concerns on the left. And any healthy individual is going to have a good balance of both. Mm-hmm. And so this is why I wrote in Unity 2020 on my ballot, because I couldn't pick either one of these fucking awful people. And so that was the only way I could contain any sense of, or retain any sense of integrity that I could be proud of myself afterwards. And this whole integration thing is I think what is going to bring us forward. But again, I think you can only really do that if you stand strong as an individual, especially if we're talking about governance, because this is the kind of the soundbite that I play in my head. It's my little earworm. It's in an individualist society, you can choose to create a collectivist group, but in a collectivist society, you cannot choose to be an individualist.
But again, I think you can. And that's exactly the sort of group that I've tried to create, is the sort of group that you can be an individual in, or that I've tried to support or create, depending on.
But I mean, in a society.
How about just outwardly? How about, okay, so I see us approaching, God, this is a whole fuckaroo of a tangent, but I see us approaching this very plausible reality where there's a whole bunch of shit that you can no longer do in the public square. But once you get home to your little compartment where you put on your VR set and can live out your multitudes.
Oh God!
Like, man, what, you don't think that's where it might be heading, bro?
No, I do. It's soul crushing, but that.
Yeah, but no, I guess what I'm saying is that the practical application of what we're talking about is realizing that we need the conservative voice and we need the liberal voice. We need the religious voice and we need the secular voice. We need to have conversations and to lessen the demonization. That if we understand within ourselves that we're greedy and we're selfless, if we understand in ourselves that we're horny but we care about other people's boundaries and respect that, when we understand that we can be shitty people and we're also wonderful people, then we can be more forgiving about the people around us. And until we're kind of finding this integration in ourselves, we're going to continue to demonize the people around us and say we have to fight them, they're the other. And I think that that's what we've been getting more of with social media here in the last 7 years. I think social media has done just that. And the more people we have talking about the importance of both sides and finding the middle ground instead of going to what's the new group now, Parler. Right? Instead of going to your separate social media group where you get that super echo chamber, that's going to make this worse. So I
had a thought.
So how do people on the left bring people on the right in, and how do people on the right bring people on the left in? And I think these are important questions that we have to ask, because we can't do it in big ways. We can't do it right now in big ways. I think the experiments have to start in small groups before they start on a national scale, to kind of walk back some of what we've already been doing in the last 7 years or so.
One person realizing that they'll make more conservative moves as the world gets dodgier, that's what has done it for me. And I had my identity stolen a few months back, and I got more boundary oriented. It just all around made the compassionate collectivist voices in my head like already responded to by the self-preservation side of me being like, you're being naive, lock your fucking doors.
I saw a great meme. It says, if you've been robbed, you become a libertarian, or if you've been taxed or shut down by the government, you become a libertarian. If you need health care, you get sick, then you become a liberal. And then if you've been robbed, you become a conservative. Right?
I have not,
and it pushes you in those directions.
Yeah, it certainly pushed a bit. Like it certainly did. Like, cause man, and okay, so I was gonna say, like, this is on the super existential. I think this is a great example. When I'm at Burning Man, I am much more. My heart is identifying more as an individual who is at Burning Man than I am as a tentacle on the octopus of Burning Man. Like, I don't actually. When I'm there, there's only these kind of usually neurochemically or meditative moments where I like fully feel that I am, a gear in this machine. I am an appendage of this creature. I am a quark in this fucking particle, whatever. But my brain ego like doesn't even like feel really all that cool about woohoo, I'm a part of Burning Man culture, we're moving it forward, like most of the time, honestly. And that's because I don't have for me to feel really part of a collective, I need to know the inner council and like be rubbing elbows with like I need to feel that thing of that I am part of a duocracy in which, and I know you need to work for that, but I prefer smaller collectives. I don't feel that sense of being a part of something, but also too, this in the last few years, like now, like I get a fucking boner about being a part of the American project now. I used to think of it so much as the American experiment, and the American experiment to me is like, what are we going to find out by by doing this project to fuck around and find out that then will be shared to the rest of the globe. Like, but just recently, I'm like the American Project, which is, all of the heroes and celebrated people over the time who are, coming from very different places are a part of this project, which isn't moving towards a specific thing. It's doing a ton of things, but I actually feel part of something that isn't so much of a team as a project, a group project,
a process. I wonder about some of the comments that people have left. I know you're going to bring up Steve earlier, but we kind of went right past that.
Well, that takes us back into the into the thing of that we're talking about. He's talking about that you are you implying that a person could immediately survive off the grid instantly?
I think that's an element of self-reliance. I think I taught self-defense for a long, long time because I believe that fundamentally one of the kind of cornerstones of existence is civilization seems like it's solid and not going to fall down. But at any given moment, whether there's a home invasion or domestic violence or you get mugged or we have riots, that you never know. That in one of the kind of fundamental skills that I believe most human beings should have is that ability to take care of themselves, if at all possible. My uncle, he was a paraplegic, and he ended up being the head of the Libertarian Society, the Computer Society, and the gun club. He had like 24 handguns. So yeah, if you came into this old guy with the wheelchair, you're gonna have a hard time.
Well, just food, food. I observe. I will say, I don't know if elitist is the word. The way in which I observe myself to be better situated than some in terms of if there wasn't a grid anymore, if there wasn't grocery stores, is I've done a lot of being able to go without food, so I just don't need a ton of it as constantly, and also being able to like things like forage mushrooms and stuff like that, and being able to just, I think I would be able to survive a little better than some of the folks I know who are mega addicted to the grocery store, like motherfucking need, like it's a matter of hours before they are an animal. I've got like a day.
But I also think one of the best ways to survive long term is to have a crew, to have people around you who you can form a community with. Because again, if you're surviving on your own for 5 days, that's one thing. But if you're going to make it through a winter, that's something else. And if you've got groups around you with 100 people and you're by yourself and they're a roving band, it's good to have your own crew. So I think it's a balance between both that self-reliance and having a good collective.
We live in a winter place. I went and I spent 2 nights in a teepee in North Dakota a couple of years back. Fuck. Like if we don't have the grid, we all have to fuck out of places where it winters. Fuck. Oh man.
So there's another comment here from Steve at 750 saying, Chris, would that be true? That would be true. The economy was a level playing field. Something I'm really fascinated with is the like macroeconomics, cryptocurrency. So I follow a lot of those people. And something I started to realize is that a lot of these people have a view for humanity that is actually very altruistic. They just want to go about it a different way. So I've heard it described that like Elon Musk, part of why he's doing what he's doing is he believes that the best way to help the world is if you give the developing nations, electric cars, giant batteries, solar cells, all of these things, that if they can skip through that industrial manufacturing phase, that this is what's going to allow abundance. This is what is going to avoid a great deal of environmental degradation, and that this is one of the best possible ways to help humanity. And so again, I think a lot of times people look at billionaires as if they're this just monolithic entity of self-interested greed. And I think there's a lot of that there, but I also believe that innovation and disruption and technology and people who are passionate about creating things for humanity, that these can lead to tremendous wealth and that these people can be tremendously giving. Not all of them are, but I think the story that we form about people who are not in our immediate circle aren't always the kindest, most realistic stories. And so if we're not hanging out with people with lots of money, it's really easy to vilify people that we're not rubbing elbows with. And I would kind of caution against that.
Yeah,
for sure. And I'm just trying to remember, because it said like that would depend on if or something, like if it was an even level playing field. I don't remember what we were talking about.
So could you throw that up? It was Steve's comment at 750.
Yeah, that would be true if the economy were a level playing field. However, I agree, the union egoists describe. Yeah, I don't remember the context of that, but I do like what you're saying, because that's been my whole thing. It's like you can just do more good if you have more to do good with. And so that's been kind of my unifying rally cry to get behind, like amassing the most amount of wealth that I possibly can. To just to be able to see, because I live in LA and like I can't go anywhere without being asked for money. And so it's like I want to be able to like not worry about that ever. You know, like, because I came from being so broke to where I would, like, people would ask me for change and I'd be like, yeah, okay, I could use money too, bro. like okay. But now I'm not in that position anymore. And it's through individualism that I got myself to not be in that state anymore. And I was one of those staunch individualists that was like annoying, where I wouldn't even ask for help. I think I've borrowed like less than $1,000 in my entire life. And I've just like starved and gotten by and done whatever I had to do to get by, because I was ashamed of asking for help. It's not a virtuous thing. But what I did notice is that like individualism is what got me out of that. And it allows me to have a full enough cup to where I can start to think about the collective without having to stress myself out and become one of the other people that needs help. It allows me to position myself in such a way to where I can be the one that provides help to others.
And that's very much my motivation as well, is that money doesn't solve all your problems. And Naval Ravikant talks about this beautifully. He talks about money does not solve all your problems. It solves all your money problems. And then it gives you freedom. And I think that freedom is so important, because if you are a giving and creative person, and this is a term Naval uses a lot that I'm going to borrow here, that money provides leverage for you to be able to do bigger and better things. But at the same time, so does a collective of people. So something that I found when I've been an artist, I actually stopped doing art in my 20s because I was making more of a difference by teaching martial arts than I was by creating artwork that was going to end up on a coffee house wall or on a corporate lawn. Like, what's that going to do for anybody? But when I went to Burning Man, what happened was my life changed, and I didn't expect it to. And when I broke down why my life changed, it was because art on a massive scale that was participatory, that was so unexpected and so amazing that it woke me up. It gave me this, I always call them what the fuck experiences. And all of a sudden I realized that this is something that could really change people, because it changed me. And then I realized that if I have a group of fun, creative, hardworking people around me, that we together can do this. And that's also leverage. So whether it's through the individual who's amassing wealth, or it's in the individual, the capitalist who's creating a business like Elon Musk, or it's the artist who is connecting to other hardworking artists who are creating from the leverage of a group working together. These are all ways to magnify our expression in the world and to give more in ways that mean something to us and hopefully to the people around us.
You just got me excited about something. Go ahead, Zach.
Oh, I do. UBI is the thing I think about most, because I think it's such an obvious move right now, and I know that the big thing that is holding it up is how much it is perceived as a left-wing flap. I think that if it weren't for it being framed so much that way, as a redistribution of wealth, as like I would see it as like irrigating the affluence of the collective, in the same way that roads, or knowing that that there's not going to be fighter jets from some rogue nation flying over you, blowing your house up. It's like, these are the things that we get to afford by being an affluent, wealthy collective. And part of that now is I don't think that there would be people rioting and burning shit down and talking about guillotines for the rich if they were getting $1,000 a month, or just if their basic needs were met, or if you could actually.
You know how many people doing that are wealthy white people?
I know, I get that. No, totally. That's the part of the thing that makes it infuriating.
So let's like
I
back off of that one a little bit.
Portland, okay, but oh god damn it, what was I saying? It completely like that there's something that we all benefit as individuals. Like if the garden had less of this really unfair desperation, you know, at the leveling playing, like not being able to argue that it's a level playing field, like just the difference. If you are born in a particularly rugged area of like Flint, Michigan, like I've had some fucking super heart drop like moments where somebody was saying was pretty much just expressing like we've kind of given up on that part of that, you know, like that area has been like we're just not trying, and to observe that with the reaction towards, like there was a lot of outcry of compassion and outrage with the Flint water crisis, but what really fucking got done, you know, is just like there's just places that are just do not receive the benefits of living in a wealthy collective or just, you know, nation. And it's so fucking brutally unfair. And I know that unfairness is a part of reality, but God, I mean, I think that we would all benefit, and the individual would benefit so much from you know, like there would be more fertile soils for individuals to rise from if there wasn't so much desperation. One, because it just makes the whole place dodgier, and two, because then you do have to, like, as you're straightening your tie in the mirror, and it's like I'm self-made. Fuck, I started from a really like luxurious starting point, and others are just like, you know, brutal fucking situation from the get, you know?
Well, one of the things I really love showing people from outside Detroit and kind of giving them the story of is if they've seen that movie, I think Detroit, about the riots, the revolution, back in the late 60s, is if you look at the houses in that movie, and it's very subtly done, they don't make a big deal out of it. They're beautiful, rich homes. People, black families flocked to Detroit in the 40s, 50s, and 60s because there was a possibility for a level of living here in Detroit that existed almost nowhere else in the country. And we had an affluent black population, a middle-class population that was astounding. And what's really the story that I like to show is that there were neighborhoods. There's neighborhoods like Boston Edison, the Villages, Greenfield Village, all of those, where those communities held together through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, through the white flight, the black flight out of the city. And you had this opportunity for these entire communities that were lifted up. And then they continued to look out for one another, even as the rest of the city fell apart around them. And this is a part of Detroit that few people get to see. And it's one of my favorite parts. So you have these stories about these sections of Flint and these sections of Detroit that fell into ruin, and they don't have these advantages. But there's also that self-determinism, that individualism that came from people who were willing to move from somewhere else to somewhere entirely new and make a better life. But it's combined with that family mentality and that community mentality that allowed portions of the city to remain strong and vibrant, even while the rest of the city fell apart. And I think there's that sort of balance there as well.
Which is an interesting thing that kind of ties to my life, because the only reason I was born into any sense of privilege or luxury at all is because my dad, who's a Mexican immigrant, built an insurance company. And so it's like this little mix of like technically privilege, but I got it because my dad worked really hard after his dad came from Mexico. And so it's like, it's an interesting conversation, like specifically being me. Yeah, because you can call me white if you want to, and you could get away with it. And you could call me brown if you wanted to, and you could get away with it. I technically came from privilege, but also technically didn't in a lot of different areas. And so, because like my dad died when I was a kid, and so we had to live off whatever money he made. And so we were the broke people in the good neighborhood. And so like the whole conversation of it is really fucking interesting to me. And I think ultimately, like since I know we're running low on time here, like for me, the ultimate version of this would be like, I want to live in an individualist society that knows how, or an individualist society that strives for greatness, that is willing and able to take care of everybody else who can't. That's what I want. Because that's what I love about America. Like we talk about the American experiment or project or whatever, and it's like, no, you come here to be great. You come here to be nothing short of great, and to be the absolute best version of yourself that you can be, and that's what you give to the world. We won't settle for anything less. Like, that's what I love about America. But then also the thing that we didn't ever fully integrate was like, yeah, that's not going to work for everybody. And there's good reasons that doesn't work for everybody. So taking that into consideration, we need to find a way to take care of everybody that can't strive for greatness for whatever reason, so that either they can later on, or they're taken care of because they'll never be able to do it.
And for me, go ahead.
I'm just going to say, it's not even that many people that need to get taken care of. Like, it's not like it would be that hard of a thing to do. But it would take a little bit of a reallocation, which is why, like, when it comes to universal basic income, like, Zach, I really wish you could argue in favor of the financial aspects of it, because I get the moralistic elements of it, but I would love to know what that would actually do to our country on a financial level.
Well, it was interesting here, and maybe this is another topic. I dove into macroeconomics. I got interested in a lot of these topics through cryptocurrency, but this spring, when the economy should have collapsed, but it didn't, I'm like, everything I know about economics says we should still be in a depression right now. So I looked into it more and more, and I started to realize that technology has created a mix of simultaneous deflation and inflation. All of the common luxuries that our grandfathers never would have had, even if they were rich, the phones that we have, the VR rigs, the PlayStations, these are actually very, very affordable, even to people who are otherwise poor. But what's going up in price is housing, medicine, college, things like this, the things that matter. And the reason why the economy hasn't collapsed is because there's these new theories of money. Well, now that we're off the gold standard, we can print, we just literally print $4 trillion. I think we're up to 6 trillion now, which devalues the average dollar for the average person, but it raises equity prices and housing prices and cryptocurrency prices. And what this means is, if we can do this without causing inflation for the first time in history, and we're not causing inflation because of technology, for the first time in history, it might be possible to provide added income to the average person, to give more freedom to the average person, to have maybe a society closer to Europe where you can take 6 weeks off and not have to kill ourselves. And people can focus more on service industry, on being creative, on tech, on things like this. We don't know it, but we are entering a new economic reality that I don't think many people have wrapped their head around yet. And I'm barely wrapping my head around.
Yeah, I certainly haven't.
And that's you said for the UBI that I'm coming from a moralistic place. That's part of it, and that's not I don't think that's not the strong argument for it. It's like there's going to be this much havoc. I think that
let's not burn everything down sort of place. Like, I think a lot of what happened here was on the surface said because this is police injustice. But I also think what Zach's kind of getting at, and I think what a lot of people intuitively know, is that a lot of people feel that the system is fundamentally unfair, and that there is this massively growing disparity between rich and poor, and that ability to have freedom and healthcare at this time. I mean, the president gets flown to get experimental drugs that would have cost something like $6, $7, $8 million to get over what he called the common cold. But when you've got an entire Black church with 60% of people who have COPD are dying from it, they don't have the healthcare that they need. This is why people are burning down cities. This is why people are either in some cases protesting, in other cases rioting.
People feel so not part of any collective or community on a national scale, or even like, just their state.
Which is weird because I do.
I do now, but I also like I have the time and luxury, and my basic needs are met, and I've had enough time to gestate in a place where I'm able to fucking look around the place, and I keep finding more and more things that like bring me to my knees with gratitude to live here. But if you're just always struggling and always in survivalist state, you never get the opportunity to garden those understandings in that way, or to garden yourself as an individual.
Well,
like, You will end up always like just having to, your life will be that first song in Les Miserables. At the end of the day, you'll be nothing but nothing.
I love that song.
I love that.
I work with a lot of people from inner city of Flint and inner city Detroit. Well, more Detroit than Flint. And I'm not speaking for them by any means, just kind of reflecting what many people don't get to hear. And there is this sense of a lack of community, or a community that's very, very based around institutions that are crumbling, churches that very few people go to anymore. And when you have a city that's been hollowed out by white and black flight over 30 years, and then you have a central part of the city that's doing very well for some people, there isn't the community that allows people to be healthy. There isn't a sense of trust for your neighbors, because your neighbors are so poor and desperate that they're going to do what they need to do. And that means taking from you in order to get by. That their kids die both from the gangbangers and from the cops. And that it's hard when you're struggling in Maslow's hierarchy and needs to get by on a day-to-day basis to become that self-made person. And those that do often do it by getting out. But then that means that you're leaving whatever sense of community you have behind. And people often do want or need that sense of community. So I think it is a big challenge. And I think that, and I don't know how you do UBI. And I think this is worth maybe another discussion.
How do you do our fucking military? How do you do that? You fucking, there's, goddamn it, some of the things that we spend trillions of dollars on. It wouldn't be trillions and trillions.
Well, you know what happens if we don't spend trillions and trillions of dollars on those things?
What's that?
Yeah.
You know what happens if we don't spend trillions of dollars on those things?
Theoretically.
The people that we spend trillions of dollars to fight kill us.
Or they kill each other.
In theory.
That we've had more peace in the world since 1950, despite the horrible things our country and other countries have done, than we had at any time before that. If you study world history before 1950, and you look at the number of wars that occurred and the number of deaths that occurred, I mean, look at Europe from 1950 back forever. And if you didn't have plagues, you had people running over the hills with lances and swords constantly. So there is something to be said with deterrence to worldwide violence because of a huge military. And it is a scary thing to know what would happen if that went away suddenly, because that vacuum gets filled by other people with smaller militaries and no better scruples than we have.
And smaller collectivist countries tend to outsource their defense to us.
Yes.
All that I said, you said, how would we do it? And I said, look at the things that we do already. The
things that we need.
I get it. You get the flip side. Okay. Chris and I both jumped on that.
It can be done. In fact, it's like, I think Yang details it pretty well how it would be done just from pretty much taxing the tech giants. But then again, that comes to defending our precious billionaires, and I totally understand.
Well, we just know they don't pay taxes. Like I used to live in San Francisco, and it was widely known that Twitter just doesn't pay taxes.
Yeah. Like if you ever want to understand, like read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, it describes very clearly why the rich do not pay taxes. That when you have accountants and lawyers, you can get around basically any law that there is. Yeah. So it's the poor and the middle class typically that pay taxes, not the rich. And it will always be
politicians to keep those loopholes in place.
And even if they don't, they're going to still find ways around it. And then if they can't, they're going to move somewhere else. I mean, we have the problem with the global society is the rich can live anywhere, you know?
Just by the idea is, I mean, it can come from other places, but pretty much just by taxing the massive wealth that is generated from these new technologies, which is pretty much just like irrigating the gems that are coming out of the mine of the American project, you know, like, and I mean, the idea is raising the floor.
But even then, if you tax American countries, they leave, and then you lose jobs, and then you're in a different shit situation. So I think it's just so much more complex. There's no such thing as an easy answer, I don't think.
Okay. No, I grasp that. It's not. But the idea is that it's not an answer. It's a moment and a move that I see as both like imperative. Like the longer we wait to do this, or like right now, just with the pandemic, like wouldn't you agree? Fuck, now we're getting the conversation is universal basic income, and I got to go somewhere. That's a whole fuckaroo of a thing. But it's like it's this because it does so many things at once. It's this band-aid for this really fucked up moment that we're in. Like just with AI taking all our jobs, they're gonna continue to take our jobs, and there's gonna be a bunch of people. We're gonna have this whole crisis of meaning and crisis of people not having an income. So there's that. There's the pandemic. So it's this moment. It's this thing to act as a Band-Aid. But a huge thing that I see that it could also do, which is exactly what we're talking about, is that there's a bunch of people who, for very good reason, don't feel like a part of any kind of a community when it comes to the United States of America at all. And so for there to be this like, whoa, I get some coins to go to whether they take those coins to the arcade or whether they see that as like, whoa, I can start like building myself. And then I think that it's almost inevitable that there'll be so many who will have the same realizations that I've had, where it's like, whoa, this can be a great game if I play it. I wasn't playing it before. I was shouting at what was unfair about it.
Well, and one of the things that I do with the clients that I work with, a big part of what I do as a psychologist is I talk to a lot of my clients about financial literacy, because almost nobody, whether they're middle class, lower upper middle class, or poor, have had a proper financial education about how do you build and amass money in a way that's going to allow you to retire comfortably or have freedom now. And then I do that so that they have enough education and know that they need to find a financial advisor. And this is something that this is why we've had these episodes on cryptocurrency and finance in businesses, is because if you don't this comes back to the individualist point. If you do not understand for yourself how to defend yourself, you become a victim. If you do not understand finance and money, you remain poor and at the mercy of the forces around you. You are not free. And that this isn't about becoming rich in a greedy way. It's about, how do you have enough money to be comfortable if you get sick? How do you have enough money to feel taken care of when you're older? How do you have the money to live and express yourself artistically? And how do you have enough money to take care of the people and the things that you love? And if you don't have those basic foundational skills, you are reliant on politicians. And the three of us talking about what the politicians should do aren't going to make the politicians do the right thing. But what we can do is educate our friends and ourselves about how to do these things ourselves, how to take that not power, just that skill to apply it to our lives in a way that's going to make a difference for us.
Yeah. And we have this amazing moment right now. There's things that are obviously fucked about it. Well, this is one of the silver lining things that I see as being a moment about what is wonderful about this moment, where we're going to have, hopefully, and it sucks to say hopefully, like a fairly inert federal government for the next 4 years.
Yes.
Like, and a return to boring and obstructionist. And so what I'm saying, like, this is very, very privileged. This is just plain privileged as fuck of mine to say, but like, it's great that there'll be no hope from the top for a while, and that's not permanent. But I think that for a lot of us, it's going to be time to look around and be like, okay, how can I fix things around me and within me? Because there ain't no fucking way that relief is coming from this shit.
I remember when Trump called Biden boring. I'm like, no, please, let's make American boring again. I'm like, I miss boring.
Yeah.
I really want it back.
To disengage from holy fuck, are we descending into, just utter chaos where we won't be able to garden our dreams because there'll be no safety to do so, to something that hopefully will look like just to not be looking off to the monoliths of political power to grant you any kind of salvation. I don't think it's coming. I think there'll be some significant little changes that I could see coming out of this administration, but I think it's an excellent opportunity to focus on yourself as an individual and your small dialed in collective.
Mm-hmm. No, and I think this is a good wrap-up point. Before we did wrap up, Chris, I want to ask, you mentioned a book that you were recommended that kind of led you into shadow work. What was that book?
Yeah, for sure. It's called Embracing Ourselves, and it's by a couple named Hal and Sidra Stone. Really, really good. That book fucking gave me hope.
I also think you mentioned something about voice or voices.
Oh yeah, that's voice dialogue is
okay.
What that book is about.
Got it.
Yeah, it's their version of parts work.
And I'm not sure where Zach went here, but
me either. He had to go.
Had to go. Okay, great. So What, Chris, what would you say for you? How can people get a hold of you if they're interested in finding out more about what you do?
Oh yeah. Well, you can find me on Facebook. I think I'm tagged on whatever post anybody clicked to get in here. That's pretty good. And then from there, I post my Twitter on there. I post my Instagram on there. Mostly active on Instagram, and I have all that linked to my page.
And who are the sort of people you work with? Like, if people did want to reach out to you, what do you help people with, and what are the sort of people who generally come to you?
Yeah, so it's kind of a wide array of things. I've done. Let's see. Right now, I have clients working in AI actually right now. I've worked doing consulting, helping CEOs like run their businesses a little bit better. I do personal coaching. Right now, me and my business partner are launching a business course, helping other coaches and people integrate their emotional relationship to their business, so that they can actually like feel an integrity and authentic and feel like it's actually this fulfilling life path that people intended to get on. A lot of people don't ever get there, so I'm helping people get there.
Nice. Excellent. Well, good talking, Chris, and really good having you here. I enjoyed the last time we talked too. So I hope you have a good day.
Yeah, likewise, man. Thanks so much for having me on. Always a pleasure.
Okay. Yeah, great. Cheers.
All right, take care.